Welcome, everyone. It's such a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation about the recently published book, Artificial Intelligence and Education in the Global South, a Systems Perspective. And I'm delighted this morning to be joined not only by my co-authors of this book, Zainab Azim, Maria Renee Palomo, and Calista Thoni, but by four extraordinary leaders of practice who are actually developing implementations based on technology and in AI in various geographies around the world. And we're going to hear mostly from them. And so with us are Magdalena Brier, who is the director of the ProFuturo Foundation. She has been the general director of the foundation since 2019. And that initiative, that foundation, is an educational innovation program that leverages technology and is supported by the Fundación Telefónica in Spain and Fundación La Caixa. It's a program that operates in 30 different countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. We're also joined by Dina Gobashi, who is the Director of Global Education Transformation at Microsoft, where she leads the efforts of the company to support education systems in their digital transformation journeys. She works in that role with global education leaders to co-design scalable, sustainable strategies to support students in gaining the skills they need for the future. Also with us are Venkatesh Reddy, who is the Chief Officer and President of Convigenius Insights, in a company that brings expertise in education and strategic initiatives, and he is a graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And then lastly, but no least, with us is Revanthu Taluru, who works as the Director of Global Implementations of Learning Equality. He's passionate about equitable edtech and believes in the power of technology to help educators bridge gaps in learning levels for the most underserved children. So welcome, all of you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. So let me begin with a question to all of our speakers, and maybe start with Magdalena. What do you think are the main barriers and the opportunities to leverage the power of artificial intelligence to transform education systems in the Global South? And what ideas in the book resonated with your own experience leading ProFuturo? Magdalena.
Hello, Fernando, and thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity you're giving us to share these reflections. When we talk about using the power of artificial intelligence to transform education systems in the Global South, I believe we need to start with honesty. The potential is huge, but also are the challenges. Let me share what I see as the main barriers and opportunities based on a study we published this year with the Organization of Ibero-American States, focused on Latin America. Although my examples come from this region, our experience in Africa and Asia shows that the issues are very similar. Regarding the barriers, first, we need to build critical digital citizenship. It is not enough for students to know how to use AI applications. They must understand the principles behind the AI, the logic that shapes it, and the social effects it creates. In your book, you speak about a multi-dimensional skill that includes knowing how AI works, using it effectively, and thinking about its ethical and social impact. This resonates deeply with our work at ProFuturo because we see that without this critical understanding, technology can become a black box that the students simply consume. Second, there is a challenge related to integration. AI cannot live outside the education system. It must connect with curriculum, teacher training, and infrastructure. If students do not have connectivity or teachers do not have the skills to use these tools, AI will not close gaps. It will make them bigger. In the book, you also speak about this systemic approach, and this is exactly what we have learned in ProFuturo. Technology alone does not change education. It needs a whole ecosystem. Third, we must address ethical responsibility. Most AI tools for education are developed in the North. This raises questions about bias, privacy, and cultural relevance. The book dedicates entire sections to these risks. On this topic, let me share that in our recent publication with the OEI, we published the first map of initiatives of AI-powered education applications created in Latin America. Finally, the role of the public sector is crucial. Without public investment and clear policies, AI will remain a privilege for a few. You also emphasize this point in your book when you say that strong governance and financing are essential to ensure equity and sustainability. In Profuturo, we have seen that partnerships between governments, private organizations, and civil society are the only way to scale impact. And about the opportunities, I will mention three. First, AI can multiply and diversify educational resources. Digital content can make learning more engaging and relevant. Your book highlights how AI can generate localized materials adapted to cultural and linguistic contexts. This is powerful for regions like Latin America where diversity is the norm. Second, AI can make teaching more efficient. It can help teachers plan lessons, automatize administrative tasks, and provide data analytics to personalize learning. Your book also gives many examples of tools that support teachers in these ways. Third, AI can act as an omnipresent tutor, personalizing learning for every child. This is not science fiction, it is already happening. And this is also mentioned in your publication that presents how adaptive learning systems and virtual tutors can offer real time feedback, even in large and diversified classrooms. So, finally, on your question about what resonated with my experience at Profuturo, two ideas from the book really spoke to me. First, the insistence on a systems approach. Technology alone does not transform education. It must be a part of coherent strategy that includes curriculum, teacher development, and governance. Second, the emphasis on equity. AI can be a great equalizer or a great divider. Everything depends on how we design and implement it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. I'd like to invite my colleague and co-author of the book, Maria Rene Palomo, to say a few more words about equity, the equity divides, what ideas in our book connect with that. Nene.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. I really like that you mentioned that technology alone doesn't change education, that we need a whole system. And you also mentioned the use cases where what AI could do. AI can multiply educational resources, generate localized materials, personalized learning, and we mentioned that in the book. In one of the chapters of the book is about learning, and in each chapter we start presenting the key challenges in learning. We have low foundational learning levels in the Global South in literacy and numeracy that remain widespread, large class sizes and limited teacher time, also one-size-fits-all instruction. But for all of these challenges, we saw many things that AI could do. And as you mentioned, AI could support personalized learning by adapting content, pace, and feedback to students' current learning level. It can strengthen foundational skills through targeted practice in reading and math. And it can also provide teachers with actionable insights on students' progress, helping them focus their time where it is most needed, and also complement, not replace teachers, allowing educators to focus on higher value instructional and relational work. And we mention all these use cases because it's things that AI could help to achieve more equity in education. So students, we know that in the Global South, there's a novel credit curricula. Students cannot follow that curriculum. So that's where AI can come and fill this gap and make our education systems more equitable. And I'm just summarizing a bit of our chapter 3 about learning. Our chapter 4 is about curricula, and every chapter is built kind of in the same way, where we present the challenges, what AI could do, and what AI is already doing. So I invite you all to read our book and look for use cases. I like that in one of our webinars that we just had, they said that it was like Wikipedia, that you could just read a bit and open links and you could go and see new use cases. So that's a bit of what I wanted to share about AI and learning and AI and curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nene. One of the ideas that we convey in the book is that we approach this examination of AI in education with open-minded agnosticism. And the basis of the agnosticism is that when we look at the last 3 decades and all the promises that technology made about how it was going to transform education, and how many of those promises were left unrealized, we have reason to be cautious about what is going to happen. And we have reason to mistrust all of the hype that we hear these days. There is a real risk that the applications of AI will end up solving problems that nobody thinks they have, but the problems that exist in the minds of developers and so on. So let me turn it over to you, Dina, as someone working in Microsoft, one of the companies that is actively working in making developments. How do the ideas in the book about the difference between innovation, tinkering with the existing system, improving it at the margins, versus transformation, reimagining the system, how do those ideas resonate with you and with what you see at Microsoft? Over to you.
Thanks, Fernando, and thanks to everybody for having me today. Look, innovation and transformation, I think these two forces are not really mutually exclusive. I believe they work together. Innovation alone doesn't create transformation, but meaningful transformation in education, the kind that would really shift the outcomes, close the learning gaps, and prepare every learner for the future, really requires innovation. As your book makes it really clear, innovation is actually the easy part. Every system can point to a pilot, a tutoring app here, an adaptive platform there, some teacher training somewhere. And all of these pilots, they generate excitement and maybe small localized results, but they rarely shift outcomes at scale. So I fully agree. These isolated attempts are not transformation. From my experience, I see a recurring set of reasons why these innovations really fail to translate into system-wide change. One, I see, for example, innovation driven by novelty, not need. Too often, new technology is pursued because it's shiny and fashionable. Ooh, this thing is really great. I could do a lot of things with it. Not because it really solves a real need in the system. And you mentioned that in the book too. The right question is not, okay, this is a great tool, what can I do with it? But really, what specific challenges can this tool help me solve? How would I know it worked? What are some of the pressure points, like the pressure points on the body, that if we target them, we could get a multiplied effect because resources are constrained, particularly in the global south? Sometimes those highest leverage problems are not always the most glamorous, and that's why we don't go for them. The other thing I see is there is sometimes failure to see the whole system, and I think your whole book talks about this. That true transformation requires a deep understanding of all of these interdependent components of an education system: the curriculum, the assessment, the teacher capacity, the policies, leadership, financing, community, and the culture. And then how do you build a holistic plan that's going to take all of this into consideration? And then sometimes I also see a lack of leadership vision, courage, commitment to scale. We started pilot without any idea about where it could grow, where it could scale. What is the bigger vision here? Scaling innovation, I've seen, is both an art and a science. There is a science to it, but the practices that enable successful adoption, replication, and sustainability of innovation, those are often missing. And then last but not least, I really would love to change the way we talk about things sometimes. Technology failed or technology succeeded. AI will do this or AI will not do that. Because I think misdiagnosing failures or successes and attributing them to the technology is a challenge in and on itself. When a project fails, sometimes we blame the technology, but that same technology could succeed somewhere else. The differentiator isn't the tool, it's how we use it. So the why and the how behind the innovation matter greatly in its ability to turn into a transformation at some point. I also think education should be this great equalizer, but let's face it, today the design of education systems is extremely flawed. It's full of constraints. You mentioned that in the book as well. That's why there's always excitement every time there is a technology or a new AI and its potential to enhance education. That's why there are all those hypes, because we're desperate for a solution to help us with things like the Six Sigma problem and other overcrowded classroom, et cetera, et cetera. So with a general purpose capability like AI is different than any other technology, the possibilities are enormous. And you mentioned many of them: supporting teachers, enabling students to learn, personalizing instructions, all of that. And we could finally shift education from being done with students to for students. But governments need to start by getting very clear on their own challenges and opportunities. Einstein said that if I have 1 hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes defining it. But what we do is we jump quickly to doing something instead of really trying to understand what are the challenges in my particular context and country. So my career started in software engineering. We always begin by defining the end state, the system we ultimately want to build. Then we work backwards to design an MVP that tests the core value and reduces risk. Now, each iteration moves us closer to that final vision. So transformation in education requires a similar discipline and clarity on the desired future state, starting with the end in mind. What outcomes matter? How will success be measured? And then a minimal viable starting point and a path to scale. So we at Microsoft, we see our product innovation, for example, is shaped by both the real needs of education systems and teachers and the opportunities that emerging technologies create to solve longstanding challenges. So we try to find that intersection. And our work with governments is really anchored in a holistic co-creation approach. So we design solutions with them that meet their local needs, and we pair that with strategies needed for adoption and scale. So we help them with visioning, strategy, stakeholder alignment, change management, teacher capacity building. We bake in accessibility and equity in all we do, and then leadership development. And all of this is not an afterthought, but it's built into the design from the beginning of a digital transformation plan. And only by balancing that people side of transformation with the technology side that we can actually see results like all of you said and like you mentioned in the book. And there are many examples of where we've done this. So there's Taiwan, India, Brazil, Egypt. Right now we're working with them on a custom tailored plans for AI in education. We've also collaborated, like I'll be remiss if I don't mention that, with ProFuturo here, with UNESCO, UNICEF, GPE, and many others to develop a common framework for the digital transformation of education. It's a holistic 6-pillar framework, and I would say your book touches on all of those pillars. And the framework is supported by practical planning tools to help each education system really understand all of these interdependent components and then plan for a digital transformation that is cohesive, that takes it all into consideration. And it gives them this blueprint and a guide, but also it's a common vernacular for all of us to be able to collaborate and across the whole education ecosystem, which is also something you mentioned that's important in the book. And we've already done this work in Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Chile, and Brazil, and we're looking forward to doing it with other countries as well.
Thank you so much, Dina. Let me invite my colleague Zainab Azim to reflect a little bit on the ideas in the book on the need for human-centric design and what they mean in the domains of curriculum and teacher professional development. Zainab, over to you.
Thank you, Fernando. And I just want to leap up of what Dina was talking about, how often the lack of transformation, translating innovation to transformation, comes from this problem of focusing heavily on the tools and these small scale pilots and not becoming problem obsessed of what are we actually trying to solve here and who are we trying to solve it for? Those pressure points. A lot of the AI applications that we see are direct to students sometimes, but it's good to see more and more that are focusing on teachers, which is the chapter that I'm focusing on is teacher PD, and the fact that we know not just in the global south, but more at a greater scale in the global south, we are seeing teacher shortages, low quality teacher PD, given constraints of resources. PD that is episodic, one-off workshops. Not every it's optional after you are in service. We are seeing classrooms that have more than 40 students at different learning levels. And so these are like actual real problems that teachers face. And then on top of it, the administrative burdens, of which I wouldn't say grading is an administrative burden. I think that is part of the getting to know your students process, but sometimes we bucket that into there. And so when we start with those problems, and focus on the people and the problems that that's what we try to do in these chapters, we don't really see that transformation happening yet. And an example would be from teacher professional development is when Dina just talked about this failure to see the whole system. We are seeing AI applications being used in a way where teachers can grade 40 plus students, 80 students, handwriting, whatever it may be, which is great. It's a time saver. Um, but the question comes then, in a systems perspective, do the teachers have the ability to then take those grades and whatever the output the AI is giving, one, to check that it is accurate, and two, to actually use the data to help improve student learning? And that is the key question. And could AI then be used to guide teachers in helping those students who might be falling behind or those who might be doing really well and be bored, right? That's sort of the opportunity that we haven't seen as much of yet. And also, are these tools being used not to just train teachers on prompting and the technical engineering part of it, but actually on improving their own pedagogy? Are we using AI tools to build teacher capacity and not just do tasks for them? And we spoke about this on a panel yesterday on really the importance of deconstructing the teaching profession and understanding what tasks can we get AI to do that actually do save teacher time, and which ones do we really need to make sure that we train teachers on being in the loop, and making sure that we're building their capacity. And so those are some of the reflections I have, coming off of Dina's point, and what it means for people who are designing these tools, like at Microsoft or other companies. What are the implications of how do we build these tools to make sure that teachers are in the loop, that we're not just sending out an output, being used without their judgment in there? And then how are we also building teachers' judgment to evaluate those outputs? And we talk about something in our chapter, it's called the PAC framework of training tools that are trained on local pedagogy, on the local misconceptions that might be going on in that specific classroom, with students, and then being able to support teachers in building their own capacity. So those are my reflections. I will pass it back to Fernando. Thank you so much for sharing all that.
Thank you, Zainab. Well, let me turn it over to you, Venkatesh. You've been working in leveraging AI applications in a range of regions in the global south and also in low resource environments. What are the main takeaways from that work, and how do they relate to your experience? Venkatesh, are you with us?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Fernando, for the opportunity to take this question. And I think I'm actually falling in the footstep of Zainab and Dina and trying to answer their questions. So, Convigenius, the organization that I work for from the last 5 years since the onset of COVID, has sort of implemented EdTech solutions for all stakeholders, and we try to solve problems at scale for governments in India, right? And one of the humbling things that we have to understand and realize is at the tech boom that you see in India is only because of the crisis that was brought forward, both in terms of population scale and student scale, and also by the onset of COVID, right, which disrupted schooling across the world, right? So students were not studying. And so Convigenius tried to work with governments and try to solve their problems, right? So one of the first, let me share some of the examples and also what are our learnings, right? So one of the things that we wanted to solve for is learning at early childhood level, right? So we worked with a lot of third-party players within the education ecosystem and tried to develop sort of a oral reading fluency and foundational literacy and numeracy reading solution for them to sort of practice at home and also at schools, right? This sort of solved the problem, but also it made us identify the critical factors that technology is dependent on, right? So technology is dependent on teachers, right? So we had to train teachers to understand how does technology work for them, how does it save time, what kind of insights does it bring out, and then how can technology be used to sort of solve remediation or remedial learning, right? So based on the inputs from teachers and students, we had to develop tech-based learning platforms, right? So you see hyper-realistic content that we have developed for early grade students. But it's not, and it sort of generates a lot of insights for teachers to take from. But then this is not a one-shot cure for all, right? You have to sort of make it meaningful to each teacher, their students, various stakeholders at the various levels, and then a lot of effort. The imperative responsibility of imagining the technology, the responsibility of technology, and how does it solve the problems for teachers is also on the development organizations, right? So if we have developed a solution, it's the onus on us to build the capacity or train the teachers to use technology for their own benefit. So we had to build a lot of teacher training programs on how teachers can use this technology to save time, to teach, to improve classroom pedagogy and engagement within the classrooms, right? So there were AI curated lesson plans that we had developed. We also developed in physics and maths, we developed hyper realistic content that teachers could actually showcase as examples while they were teaching the classrooms, right? But if a teacher is not really good with explaining, or if she is not good with understanding of concepts herself, she can show the videos, but she can never clarify the doubts that come after that, right? So then we developed a solution which students could themselves work on, which was a personalized adaptive learning solution. You can see a classroom of students who are learning all by themselves with minimal supervision by the teachers themselves. But it also has a lot of limitations, right? You have to account for language translations. You have to account for students who are at different levels of learning, right? A single classroom might have advanced learners, it might have weaker learners, it might have average learners, and a single solution has to cater to the needs of everyone while making the content and everything extremely interesting for every type of learner, right? And they should be able to learn with their own pace. So sitting with the students, sitting with the teachers and understanding their needs was something that we sort of figured out along the way. And finally, what we developed was we developed a education systemic integrated solution called the Integrated Control and Command Center. Imagine it like a data center which shares all kinds of education data that you can imagine to various levels of government officials, right? Now, this is like any other technology, this is a tool. If you don't tell education administrators like the Secretary of Education or the Minister of Education on how to improve a system, how to look at data and improve a system, they will just look at this and use it for indicators, what percentage of my students are studying well, and that's all. They'll not understand which percentage of schools are actually pulling my data down, what kind of financial requirements do those schools need based on need-based requirements. So we developed school-based dashboards, financial dashboards. How much money is each school getting? Does the school have functional toilets? How much money is needed to make those toilets working? Are teachers there? Are teachers missing? Are teachers coming to school on time? But you have to train various levels of officials, and a subsequent amount of time went into training these government officials, right? And then assessments was one other area where we implemented a lot of solutions. But then we realized that assessments can only be used for diagnostic capabilities and formative assessments. As soon as you implemented edtech solutions for high-stake assessments like board exams, systems failed, right? Because students, teachers started copying, they started disrupting the solution. It stopped working at large scale like that. Similarly, we deployed a lot. So what we realized is based on data, we figured out how to identify students who are on the verge of dropping out, right? And trying to provide need-based scholarships to them. But then we realized a lot of officials, teachers, and school principals were trying to gamify the system, right? In terms of getting kickbacks, other things, right? So a lot of learning went into trying to tell people how to use it for the benefit and not for punitive measures or taking advantage of the system, right? So most of the learning that I really get from edtech implementation of edtech solutions is how do we invest time in training people, in sort of making people aware that use it to your benefit but not game the system, but also convincing them that tech is good, reliance on tech is good. You think of it like, you know, helping yourself, but so that effort into making them believe that tech can help them, tech can support them to solve solutions, make their life easy, was a humongous task, right?
Thank you so much, Venkatesh. Let me turn it over to my colleague, Kalista Thoni, to uh, make some comments about what you just said and connect that with the ideas in the book about how AI can transform governance and the organization of education.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Venkatesh. I think you gave such a broad range of examples, and I think that's very much linked to our book and the breadth of topics that we cover, seeing the potential for AI use across different themes. But also, it speaks to the challenge that ministries have to deal with, right? In their position, they're evaluating use cases from how they themselves use data, how it's used in the classroom, how students interact with it, whether or not their teachers and whether or not ministry staff are trained in how to interpret and then inform their decisions based on that data. So I think I appreciated the range of examples you provided, and I think those are valuable use cases that we're seeing in India, but also elsewhere. I think in our two chapters on organization and governance, we look at how school leaders have been designing and what designing school systems and kind of creating communities of learning and getting a better sense of how students in their schools are performing. And I think you mentioned there are students of different levels of capacity. There are some that are very advanced. There's some that maybe need a little bit more support, and oftentimes they're in the same classroom. And so a school leader needs to be attentive to that and be able to give appropriate instructional support. So we've been seeing a couple of use cases of how AI tools can help create that differentiation, but we're also cautious of those trade-offs where you still want the teacher to build a relationship with their student, and you still want to empower the principal, but not create a dominating structure where it's still top down and replicating the dynamic between schools and ministry. So I think that's something that I saw in your comments and something that we very much explore in the book. On the topic of governance, I think the same challenges. I think it's interesting to see that state level dashboard and to know that you're also training the state level leaders. As we're seeing the increase of AI tools, where a lot of them require some training, and in the same way that they make advanced analysis more accessible to users, I think they also require training. So it's nice to see you thinking about both parts. In the book, we explore how Global South governments often struggle with accountability issues, with real-time data. They're still using Excel and writing things very manually. So, as much as we're dreaming very big about the potential for dashboards and for very advanced analysis, we're still dealing with very poor infrastructure at times. And so, I think thinking about what the purpose of the analysis is and also the foundations that you would need and the infrastructure that you need to set up to be able to take advantage of that very advanced technology is something that we're hoping our book helps to add to the conversation and to slow down this excitement that I think also Dina mentioned earlier, right? There's a lot of excitement around the tools that are available, but what's the original purpose? And so I think the governance and the organization chapters offer a couple of thoughts of that as well as examples. And importantly, I think they highlight like the need for the transformation of the task at hand, not just improvements and making the dashboards nicer, but are we connecting the dashboards to a policy feedback loop that's using those insights to change how we're doing something? So yeah, that's probably what I would add to what you've shared, Venkatesh. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kalista. Let me turn it over to you, Revanth. At Learning Equality, you have been working to introduce AI and to design for very low resource environments. So design for equity from the get-go. You want to share some ideas about what you have learned about preventing the increase in inequality as we introduce these powerful technologies.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, just to give a quick background, Learning Equality is an organization that focuses on building products and programs to support teaching and learning with technology but without the internet, where the access to internet is sporadic or less, right? And that's the core of our work. And I think for us, when we speak about bridging equity gaps, we are talking about that 22% the book also talks about in the chapter 2, right? Like where you're essentially talking about the learners who may not have access to electricity in the schools, right? Like for learners like that, with the way in which technology is evolving every day, like in 2022, late 2022, when ChatGPT came in and all of us were excited, from then to now, AI has just like grown in ways that we wouldn't have even imagined, right? But there are still learners who don't have access to electricity, who don't have access to devices, who are still using Windows versions 2007 and 2003 in their schools, right? Like, so for those learners, I think one of the things that we believe through our work and we have learned through the years of work that we have been doing is the gaps shouldn't stop them from benefiting from these emerging technologies, right? Like, what could that potentially look like? And again, this is also something that the book highlights in many ways is AI can do a lot of things which may not be directly relevant to teaching and learning. It doesn't necessarily have to the learner having to hold a tablet with personalized learning alone. There's also things that AI can do in the backend to make things easy for the systems, for the teachers, for the learners, and for everything to function well, right? I think in our work, the three specific use cases that I have noticed and I believe are very powerful is using AI for back end processes, which would include things like what does it mean to align open educational resources to the local curricula standards, right? Like, so through an exercise that we did in 2023, we looked at more than 200,000 open educational resources and tried to make them relevant to the national Ugandan standard, the national curriculum standards in Uganda for almost like 4 subjects across 10 grades. What that does is it's actually creating resources that teachers can use without the internet. But AI has facilitated that process. Of course, we also had a human review involved because I do believe that AI still hasn't gotten to a spot. Personally, I believe that AI still hasn't got to a spot where we can fully rely on it without errors. So we had humans do a little bit of review, like curriculum experts do a little bit of review over whatever has happened. But that's one example of what it means to use AI to benefit people who don't have access to those latest emerging technologies yet. The other example that we are also working on is there are so many contexts in this world right now where lesson planning tools are not immediately accessible. But AI can actually generate good lesson plans, contextually relevant ones, within a shorter time period than what it would take for like 5, 6 designers to sit and create it by hand, right? So I think once you create those lesson plans, how you deploy it is it's just a matter of like resources and thought. But AI can still help in accelerating that process, right? So I think one key area would be towards not exacerbating those equity gaps is to just like everybody thinking of what it means to use AI for problems that exist and not just about innovations, which is also an idea that the book highlights in some ways, right? Like where we need to think of using AI in a way that it's relevant and meaningful and not just because it's innovative, right? I think the second example is exploring offline features that AI can still support through ideas like small language models, right? Like it's just about conscious thought that AI, anyone who's working with technology can think about, okay, what does it mean for learners who do not have access to internet? What is the version of the software going to look like? What is the version of learning going to look like? What are the minimal features that we can offer? I think just asking questions like that and incorporating them into the design is one way in which we can do it. And at Learning Equality, we're also exploring some of those features in terms of what it means to give content recommendations without having access to the internet, right? Like we're working on, if a teacher is working on giving one assignment, can the next assignment be informed by the small language model itself? So I think that's another area. And finally, I think one of the personal beliefs that I hold is also like strengthening AI literacy, which is also an idea that the book highlights. The book just highlights a lot of things which are very, very relevant to everything that happens in Global South. So I could be like, every time I say the book highlights it, like it's imperative, I guess. But I think strengthening AI literacy, irrespective of people who have access to the technologies or not, because if not today, someday they will, right? Like, what does that mean? And if we go back and think about like introduction of computers in school, like how learners engage with computers was very different from what it was to what it is over time, right? Like everybody did not have one computer. Like that's not how it started. Similarly, can we also think about AI literacy in that lens, saying like, okay, let's learn this, and there will be opportunities for you to engage with it. There will be opportunities for you to benefit from it. There will be opportunities for you to influence it in some ways, right? So I think these are the three large areas in which I think we can consciously think of while without widening the gaps that already exist in the system. So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you so much, Revan, for those great examples of authentic co-design and not performative co-design. Let's hear from Zainab, some reflections on what you just said.
Thank you, Ravant. You're definitely more of an expert on this than I am, but I'm going to share reflections from the book that are connected to this topic of making sure that AI does actually, and this is actually what our conference earlier this year was, AI going to bridge the gap or is it going to widen those gaps? I think you brought up an important point about AI being used on the back end, and it doesn't just have to be in the classroom with students, with the teacher. The example that we talked about in the book was Robots Mali, which they did infrastructure for everybody, but they used AI to generate 180 plus children books in the local language, right? And in a way that made learning accessible to more students of different dialects. That was in the back end. Another example that we highlighted was the teacher.ai project in Sierra Leone, where instead of having like this large language model, it was on WhatsApp, where most teachers have access, most people in the Global South do use WhatsApp. And I know Microsoft has a project with France, I think. I don't know if it's in Mali or somewhere else, coaching them through WhatsApp on better practices. And so those are, I think, two different ways of looking at, as you just highlighted, bridging those gaps instead of widening them. And then finally, I would highlight the fact, though, that there is still a concern on equity, and that comes from the piece of data, because most of the data we have is from global north context. And we see, like in Ghana, when there was a GPT pilot, there were lots of hallucinations when they were trying to do stuff in the local language, which is the language in which most people learn. And so there's still a ways to go, especially on the data part. And so those are questions that I think we need to think about. Not that we have the answers, but thank you for.
Thank you so much, Zainab. I'm going to invite our guests to, in the second part of our conversation, talk about two issues which I think are pretty crucial as we think about AI. So, one of our key themes in this book is that the conversation about the future of AI needs to be a democratic conversation, that it cannot be a conversation of software engineers alone, and that it needs to bring to the table people who actually feel the pain of the challenges of the education system, who know a lot about what the real problems are. I had a chance to participate in a study with some colleagues in Brazil, in which we did something very simple. We asked a group of teachers, what are the biggest problems that you have that you wish had a superpower to address? And then we looked at whether AI could address those problems, and it could address all of them. But yet, when we looked at actual applications of AI developments, and most of them don't touch on any of the problems. So there is very much a disconnect in spite of the conversation on human-centric design and co-design. And part of what we propose is that it's essential to begin with tremendous clarity on what is the problem we're trying to solve. And we submit that the problem needs to be concurrently to develop AI literacy, to prepare students to function in a world in which AI is transforming a lot of our life, but also to improve the effectiveness of existing systems in delivering on the fundamentals, while at the same time making systems more relevant. One of the things that surprised me, having worked on this book for the last year, is not only what the applications of AI are doing, but is to look at what the applications of AI have not yet doing, to look at the silences, at the omissions. For example, one of them, the teaching profession. The teaching profession must be one of the few professions that remain in which we still think of teachers as Atlas holding the globe in their own shoulders and place unrealistic demands on a teacher. And yet technology makes it possible to, compare that with the profession of software engineers who develop code nowadays. No software engineer worth their salt does that work alone. They're all deeply integrated. Even as more coding is done with machines, code review becomes essential. But code review is not a solo task. It's a task in which you actually have good platforms that make it possible for people to integrate their individual work with the intelligence of communities. We don't have anything remotely similar to that for teachers, and yet it is possible. So that's an example, right? And so our goal is then to focus on those three questions: AI literacy, improving effectiveness, improving the relevance of the system in producing transformation. And we think that there is no quick way to do that. There is no single solution that any of us could wave as a magic wand and say, this is going to do it. And therefore, this is something that requires conversation, concerted effort, the building of that space with participation from many actors in societies. But that's difficult to do. Collective leadership is a very difficult thing to do. What I foresee is that absent some serious effort of that sort, the inequalities that concern us today in education are only going to increase within countries and among countries. We saw that happen during COVID. I see it happening with COVID. I would love to think that every country in the world is making similar progress in AI, and I don't think that's true. I mean, it's no accident that I have two former students here from India, because when I look at places where a lot of exciting things are happening, I look at India, and I look at vast swaths of the world in which very little is happening yet. And so I can predict what the result is going to be. So let me turn it over to our guests in talking about what are the barriers that stand in the way of making sure that we produce the collective leadership that we need, so that AI does not end up making systems that are hugely inequitable already, even more inequitable in the next 5 or 10 years. And maybe I'll begin with you, Dina, and then Magdalena, and then Venkatesh, and then Revant.
That's a very simple question, Fernando. Thank you. Look, I agree with you. I think we're not really seeing education systems adapt and embrace and leverage artificial intelligence the way we'd like them to, as fast as artificial intelligence is changing. And I think maybe this is one good place to start, is how do we make sure that there is enough understanding and awareness? And there are misconceptions out there too. It's not just that, there is no understanding. There is sometimes a misunderstanding of what AI can or cannot do. I think when we elevate everybody's understanding and capacity, and when they start keeping up with what is changing in AI, understanding where AI is going, so being a little bit ahead of the curve. One of the things that we do at Microsoft is we actually do have an NDA program with a lot of education systems, teachers, and their IT leaders, to show them what is coming down the pipe, so that they can plan for the future, not just for what's already been done. And I think this is important. The other thing that I think is also worth noting is we sometimes refer to artificial intelligence right now as the general purpose technology, just like electricity. Now, the ability to harness electricity came in waves, right? First thing we thought it'd be great at is to just get a light bulb and maybe some household appliances. But only later did, the use of electricity became more sophisticated. Power grids, computing, cloud, and all of that reshaped industries in modern life. I think in some way today's AI use in education is still at the light bulb stage. We're still trying to see where can AI maybe shine a little more light, maybe help with a little efficiency, as you mentioned in the book. It's still early, still exciting, but it's still focused on easy, low sophisticated applications. But I really do have faith that we will create the next wave where we use AI to redesign system and strengthen teaching and learning and drive genuine transformation. And it's going to start by all of us understanding what it really is and come together to create these specialized AI. The CEO of NVIDIA was just talking about, okay, we're now done with generalized AI. Now, how can we specialize it? How can we ground it in the data that matter? How can we localize it in the language, even in a low resource language, and make sure that it delivers on the promise and the needs of the specific user groups worldwide.
Thank you, Dina. Magdalena. Magdalena.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yes, Fernando. I think really that, It is true that we can prepare AI solutions for the unconnected world, but the real thing is that in Latin America, which is the area I know more, many million teachers haven't heard about AI at all. So maybe in India they're using it, but I think that in the rest of the world, the lack of digital skills by teachers, basic digital skills, I mean, enable them at all to use AI. It's also, I mean, teacher training is key, but I think they have to start before getting introduced to AI, to getting skilled in digital basic skills. Also, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of equipment, the lack of hardware and software, electricity, and an internet connection, it really makes it very, very difficult for AI to develop. And I think that the third point is that public institutions, I mean, the change needs to be systemic, and it needs to come from the top, because without this institutional change, in fact, the system will never change. It will only be particular situations in private schools, but the systemic change will only come when governments really introduce AI, digital skills to first, infrastructure, and then AI. I think AI comes after basic digital skills, and most of the world doesn't even have these basic skills.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. Let me hear from Venkatesh now.
Yeah, thanks, Fernando. I present a simple analogy, Fernando. There are certain problems that AI can solve. I think certain problems it's still difficult for AI and EdTech to solve. For example, I think currently we are looking at AI and EdTech like a high-speed train or a bullet train on which the students are traveling. And we are trying to make teachers, parents, government officials, everybody catch up to that bullet train by fitting in some kind of AI digital tools at that point of time, right? But if you look at what is happening in large systems like India or the global south, there is already close to around 30 to 50% of teacher vacancies which have to be filled. AI can't solve for that. AI can't solve job vacancy or job placement for teachers. The second thing it can't solve for is the pre-service teacher training, right? We are right now talking about AI literacy for students. We are talking about tech-enabled services for teachers to catch up with personalized adaptive learning, hyper-realistic content. But if you look at the pre-service teacher education programs, the curriculum for teacher education programs have not been revised since the last 20 odd years, right? So you're training the teachers on pre-service training programs which are 10 years old. And once they join in, once the best of the lot, once they get selected and join the teacher service, you are expecting them within the next 5 years to catch up to the latest in tech, right? So I foresee that being the major challenge. Everything else currently in terms of improving learning outcomes, improving the user experience of in classroom engagement or learning experience for students, all those things to AI can solve. Right now, I think we are at a stage where digital voice features are getting inbuilt into AI, right? So you don't need government officials to understand how to click dashboards or how to code dashboards. There are tools which they just need to speak or ask questions and it will give them insights. Similar is the challenge with Parents Connect. One of the areas where there is disconnect is parents understanding their students' results or their child's results and what does it mean, what do they need to focus. So right now tools are being developed for parents who can speak in local language and understand the school report cards and understand where their child is failing and give them focus on it. But yeah, the larger systemic issues about teacher vacancies and pre-service teacher development, I think we'll still have a lot of time to catch up.
Thank you so much. Revant.
I think the colleagues in the panel covered a wide range of things already. So one of the things that I do want to emphasize, which is slightly different from what everyone spoke about, is the culture that people come in with, right? Like culture and orientations around approaching AI, cultural perceptions and orientations of approaching AI. I think that's where a little bit of work needs to happen. Because when a new technology comes in, like it's very exciting. Oh my God, it can do this A, B, C, and D, right? But there's also shortcomings that it comes with, which we need to be very careful about. And also, I think the other bit is specifically like talking about how much are we listening to people? Like I do, like Professor Amos, to the point that you made about like it's hard to build cultural, collective leadership, but it's not impossible essentially, right? I think one of the things is like when people are building tools or building programs with AI in mind, rather than swaying into the direction of saying like how great is this idea, can we actually switch it and say like how much are we listening to the people who are experiencing the problem that this idea can potentially solve, right? I think that's where the gap is, and if you look at the internet now and find resources. There's so many different AI platforms that come in. And there was an exercise that I did for one of the projects where I was trying to see like what are the lesson planning tools available for which are using AI, and all of them have pretty much a similar approach. Not everybody has the cultural relevance, the contextual relevance, the examples moving from donuts to say like pakodas in India, right? Like nobody talks about those pieces which are still shortcomings. I feel like at some level it's important to listen better, define problems better before getting swayed into the direction of saying, okay, this is a great idea and it can solve. So I think that's the like I think it ties back to the cultural perspectives and lenses around solving education problems to me. I don't have a solution, but this is a direction that I would potentially want everybody to think about, every organization to think about, specifically people working in education, to say that if you want to leverage AI, what aspect of this massive problem is it effectively solving and what does it not? And hence, how does it mean, how do we have to build better programs, right? Like tying back to the systems thinking aspect, like every part needs to work together for this to happen. So I think that's what I feel like that's where work needs to happen.
Thank you, Revant. So as we bring the conversation to a close, I want to bring in someone who came as an attendee, Nora Wu. Nora is a former student, graduate of the School of Education, who has a background both in AI and in education. And upon graduation, she went to work for the International Finance Corporation as a specialist in AI, and then basically pivoted to moving to Anthropic, where she's no longer working in education, but she's in the middle of the beast of the development of AI. And I wanted you to reflect on what you've heard, Nora.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fernando. And nice to meet you all. This is definitely something bring closer to my heart, given my experience both in the education and the AI world. Maybe three key takeaways for me. One is really I hear people talk about data. Data is the foundation. That's true. When I was a student in education, we look at the data of the Ministry of Education in the Gambia. But at the same time, now I'm looking at the companies there. Also, we have to develop data strategy foundations. That's very key for AI system development. The second aspect, I think, as Fernando mentioned about the collective leadership, that's something I think what this brings us together, right? This is something I feel like a place like Harvard is so special because you have people from different backgrounds, disciplines coming together to learn from each other. And that's really something I still cherish from my student times. And the final thing, I hear a lot of people talk about like the back ends, the user different, and I do think one maybe key action I would advise everybody is just to start small, because now as a user, you really can access AI, especially, the new models from Microsoft to Google, there are different AI tools available for us that hasn't done in the past. And I think that's something to start small, to experiment with AI, to really just learn how it's going as a user. I think that's key for everybody, just to have this learning mindset and just to kind of play with it. So that's my key takeaway. And thank you so much, Fernando, for inviting me, and really lovely. Like I look forward to, learning all from you guys all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nora. Well, at this point, and the only thing left is to thank all of you, to thank Magdalena, Dina, Venkatesh, and Revant for their insights this morning, for their time, and of course my co-authors, Zainab, Maria Rene, and Calista, and all of you who chose to spend time with us this morning. We hope to have given you as many questions as answers, because we think this is a topic that requires a lot of thinking, conversation, including thinking not just about the technical dilemmas, but the ethical dilemmas that developing some of these solutions are generating. So with that, thank you all very much. Have a wonderful weekend and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.